Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. This week, we're covering Mr. Drew Atkinson's episode, talking all about early season scrapes and using doe estrus early in the year. Jacob, how you doing?
Doing well. I'm doing real well. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good. I'm excited because in about 48 hours, we're going to have a serious cold front roll through. And we're going to go hit the woods, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah,
I'm excited. It's going to be like legit cold. You know, it's going to be like mid to low 40s. In Alabama in the mornings, high probably around 72-ish, something like that.
Yeah,
where we're gonna hunt. So first legit cold front of the year. I'm very excited. Very excited.
Yeah,
so.
it's gonna be pretty awesome. Real quick, before we get into the podcast, I think we need to make a quick little announcement. We got some new merch coming.
Yeah, we got hats finally. I'm wearing my favorite one of the new hats. It's the khaki and coffee, I think, is the official colors, with the Southern Outdoorsman patch on it on the front. And then we also got all these up here. Video podcast folks can see all these.
Yeah,
but
this is my favorite right here.
That's Jacob's favorite. The old school camo.
That's my favorite right there.
Old school from Lost Hat Company. Freaking awesome hat, first of all. I actually like these better than Richardson's, just how they fit. So we got some of those. And then we got these earth-toned hats. So we got two of these they've got the earth-tone patches. And then also it's kind of earth-tone like colorways on the actual hat. So I think it's like one of them's like a grayish-brown. The other one's kind of like a dull green color. And these are meant so you can actually go hunting them. So this will be your new favorite bow hunting hat. You could turkey hunt in them if you wanted to as well. Duck hunt, whatever you're doing. And then we also got the classic, the OG Loading in Black, so the kind of green and black hat. That was the best seller back when we had hats before we sold out like a year and a half ago.
Yep.
So we got them, baby. And we also got Blaze Orange Southern Outdoorsman hats on the way. So you'll be able to get your Blaze Orange hat and go kill a state record buck in it, just like Michael Perry did.
Yeah, Michael Perry, we're in the Southern Outdoorsman hat when he killed a state record, baby.
State record buck. And you know what the sad part about it was, though, is like how Perry likes to wear his hat. He tilts it up so high that like you could just barely catch the logo in all those pictures. I'm like, man, someone should have pulled his hat down a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because, man, that picture has been all over the place.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so yeah, we got all these hats. They're available on the southernoutdoorsman.com. You can hit them in the link below and go check them out. And by now, the email blast has already gone out to our email subscribers on Woodsman Wire, but they got a discount. So if you weren't signed up for that, you missed out big time. So, yeah, you should go sign up for that if you haven't already, because I think when the Blaze Orange hats come in, we'll be sending out another discount on the newsletter. So when you go over to the website, you'll be able to see Woodsman Wire. Go sign up for it. It's free.
What's the website?
TheSouthernOutdoorsman.com. www.TheSouthernOutdoorsman.com.
Not Southern Outdoors Man.
Not man. Men. M-E-N. M-E-N. You know, Tiffany, like my wife, she does her bookkeeping and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was watching her do her bookkeeping last night. She was working in bed. We were going to sleep, and I see our name on the list.
No.
And it's spelled wrong. I'm like, oh, come on, man.
Tiffany.
Everybody gets it wrong. We should have just made it the Southern Outdoors Man, because literally our Google, we can like see our search analytics. Our Google search analytics are higher for Southern Outdoors Man than men. People refuse to use the term men, M-E-N, which is interesting. So.
Yeah. Little tangent there.
Yeah. Go buy a hat, please.
Yeah, long story short, we got some hats, guys, so go check them out on the website, southernoutdoorsman.com. So this week's breakdown episode, we're highlighting and covering a conversation we had with Drew Atkinson, who originally was on the podcast a few weeks back, actually maybe about a month or so back. And we originally talked to him about early season feed tree hunting in the mountains and the successes he's had doing that for targeting and killing mature bucks, which has been, really fascinating. And actually, so by the time this episode is actually coming out, Drew has actually just killed a really, really nice buck on a scrape around feed trees it was September 30th. He shot that buck in Arkansas, which is unbelievable, on a piece of public land. So he did exactly what he talked about in the episode and went out there and implemented it, at least from the episode from this week. So in the original episode we did with him, again, a couple weeks back, talking about the feed trees, we actually kind of dabbled in scrapes a little bit. And he talked about how much scrapes are such an important factor for him, both, actual scrapes on the landscape, a lot of your primary community scrapes, but also doing mock scrapes and how he's had success, targeting those. And I was like, dude, let's save that. We kind of touched on it a little bit in that episode, but let's save a lot of that and let's do a whole new episode. And that's really what we talked about on this week's episode with Drew. And it's a fascinating discussion because he's been doing this for 10 to 15 years. And as he talks about in the episode, he's been experimenting, doing different things and applying, especially mock scrapes in different areas and implementing different scents and all that kind of stuff to see the response of each individual buck. Because every buck's a little bit different. They all react a little bit different. But he's had tremendous success with this. And I'll be personally, I think this episode from Monday, we're going to have a lot of listener success stories come from, personally. Because I went out and hunted a piece of public that I'm like, I wish I had some doe estrus with me because I would have tried it on some super hot scrapes I had found. But
I'll try it this coming weekend.
Absolutely. So, it's one of those things that as we kind of hash out this conversation, it was a long episode. I think it was an hour and 40 minutes long or so. But there's a lot of really good information in there that, again, there were some big takeaways from Drew. But to kind of kick it over to you, Andrew, what, after kind of, interviewing Drew and kind of listening to his perspective, what were some of those big takeaways that you learned specifically on the application of focusing on scrapes during the early season, which is something we've never really focused on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I focused on it from a picture standpoint, like trail camera picture standpoint, but I've never really focused on hunting them in early season. But probably my biggest takeaway was his thoughts on scrape lines specifically and hunting and running cameras on scrape lines because – like, truth be told, when I'm talking about scrapes and I'm talking about, like, the ones that people get hung up on that usually don't produce, I'm usually talking about a scrape line. And to hear him who's had success on that, like, he's obviously doing something that I'm not doing. But I think he broke it down in a really easy to digest way because he was talking about those scrape lines. Most of the ones you find are in your negative terrain.
Yep.
Okay, so like most of the ones that you find, they're going to be in the open woods. They're going to be running down that creek bottom, wide open creek bottom.
Running down that logging road.
Running down that logging road in those open pines.
Yep.
And he's talking about the ones that you got to really get in there and find. Like they're going to be just inside of the edge of that thick cover. They're going to be where the deer are actually hanging out. And you might have found one of those, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So that we'll get into that in a little bit, but I found that very, very interesting because it's like, okay, that it makes total sense to me now.
Yeah.
Like these deer are going and they're laying down sign, and the reason that you're not having success on that scrape line and why you might think that scrapes aren't worthwhile is because you're just hunting the wrong ones. You're hunting them in the wrong place where the deer aren't at, and it kind of goes back to the thing of. I know, I'm just cutting you off. It kind of goes back to the thing of when it comes to scrapes, like the scrape is there because the deer are there, not the other way. Like the deer aren't going there for the scrape. Like the scrape is only there because there's deer there.
Yeah.
And so that's always something to keep in mind because I think where people go wrong with scrapes is they think that the deer are going to be there because there is a scrape or because there should be a scrape.
So another thing that Drew talked about with scrape lines is a very specific window of time of when he'll target a scrape line. Mm-hmm. It's kind of early. And then it's also, late season getting into like your post rut, when most other guys are out of the woods. He's like, he mentioned like those scrape lines, you'll see a bunch of them pop up during the rut, but it's just like it could be a mature buck, but sometimes it seems to be a younger buck just throwing out a ton of sign. And he's not going to come back to the area. He's just making a ton of sign and he's kind of just working off and being very nomadic. And that's some of the scrape lines I think that we've talked about in the past where you find a lot of those scrape lines come up right around the rut and it seems like you run a trail camera on it and it's like you don't see that deer you don't see a buck on that camera for 5, 6, 7 days.
Yeah.
Versus like some of these other scrapes he's talking about or like one of these scrape lines outside of that rut period, again, early season and then also late season, they're being more productive and that's when he's able to capitalize on them specifically when they're, like you said, in the right kind of habitat and terrain that's going to dictate buck movement during the daylight and not going to be at nighttime.
Yeah, definitely. And then the estrus thing, again, very interesting how he uses estrus. And that's something that I honestly kind of want to give a try this year. I want to give it more of a go.
Yes.
Because I've never been a big scent guy.
No.
At all. And we actually shared a hunting camp last year with Todd Brogdon, who works with Native Scents, or at least he was last year. I don't know if he is this year. and he hooked us up with a bunch of native scents. And we used it a little bit last year, but not much.
Yeah.
I want to use it more this year and like really give it a try and see what happens with it. You know?
Yeah, I was using it almost more so as a cover scent. Like, you kind of climb a tree, especially during like gun season or something like that, and get like they're, I can't remember, but they're like a dominant buck scent, and when you get to tree height, sprayed on the tree up above you per se.
Yeah.
So as that kind of if that wind swirls a little bit, you get something else out there other than just human odor at that elevation, kind of drifting off.
Yeah, that war party.
Yeah, the war party.
It smells like a buck fight.
Yep.
It's pungent.
Yep. But kind of going back into this with the estrus, I'm very interested in trying that, and I think a lot of listeners, probably a lot of you guys listening and also watching, maybe it kind of upped your curiosity because, like Andrew said, I've never been like huge on deer scent specifically, like using a lot of estrus or buck urine or stuff. I've dabbled it in the past.
Yeah.
I say one buck I killed as a kid at like 15 years old. I thought I'd killed him because I used some doe estrus on a scent wick and everything, and I was kind of hunting with kind of like a crosswind. And when I get back to the ladder stand, I climbed up it and I put that estrus out like 40 yards in front of me. Climbed up, and right when I climbed up, a buck stood up he was bedded like 60 yards from me in the drainage, and he stood up, threw his head up, and started walking towards me. And I'm like, that's the only time I ever think it actually potentially worked.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm like, how did he not smell me? Because I walked up and put that scent out in that same scent cone that he could smell. So anyway, it's just I don't know, but
now I grew up with a guy. I don't know if you ever met him, but Sawyer. I've talked about Sawyer a lot.
Uh-huh.
So Sawyer's dad, he's a big buck killer.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know. I've seen one of his deer. I killed a deer on a place when he killed one. He rolled up. I'm like, what is that?
Oh
dude?
Yeah. Man, he killed one. He had some private down in Auburn. He killed a huge buck down there one time, but he used to swear by doing a scent drag.
Yeah,
that's his thing.
So that's that generation. My uncles, same thing. Like, man, you get that little scent drag, you tie it, to your leg.
He will walk the woods down with that thing behind him.
Yeah.
And man, that was his thing. He before daylight, he would make an extra loop through areas just to get more scent, on that scent drag, coming back to his stand, and then he'd set up with it. And he killed a lot of big deer doing it. That's interesting that we're 523 episodes in, and I don't think we've talked to anyone who's like huge on the scent drag yet.
No, because
I think some guys maybe have mentioned it.
I think some guys have mentioned it, but also one comes to mind, but I won't mention him because he might not have done it. But like I want to say I've heard of more like negative effects of scent drags than positive, as in like you lay the scent down, and as you're like taking your stand off your back to climb a tree, buck runs in on you like on that trail, and you're like, well, crap, that kind of sucks. Or like just coming straight to your tree because you didn't loop around the tree. I mean, it's interesting because again, like my uncle's generation, kind of like Sawyer's dad's generation or so. They all did that, back in like the 90s, early 2000s in sore by it. I remember us doing it as a kid growing up and never think it worked. But then again, didn't try it a whole bunch. Or, they had like little scent pads you could like it was like a Velcro strap or whatever, go around your boot. Yeah. And you spray it and walk in and all that kind of stuff. And, as kids, I remember like hunting down the family farm, we'd like just pour a little bit, especially when you have rubber boots on, pour a little bit of deer pee on your boots and just walk in like that.
Yep.
But again, the only situation I can ever think of that, I potentially think it helped was on that one buck I killed at the farm back when I was like, I don't know, 14, 15 years old. But again, I do think like the estrus in the scrapes early season, as Drew said, if you want to test it, don't go to like your honey hole or like, go to some place that maybe you're just curious about whether you're hunting publicly or you're on your hunting club or whatever. Go to a different section. If you find a scrape or you make a mock scrape, put it out and just see. See what happens. And then, if you think it boogers the deer up, okay, whatever. It's not a primary area that you're going to focus on anyways. But if you start seeing on camera that the deer, a specific buck or some bucks are a lot more curious and start daylighting, like, all right, we might need to mess around with that a little bit more on our place. Because, I'm kicking myself for not having some with me this past week. So, kind of is what it is. But, I thought that was really interesting. And then also another thing that I thought was kind of fascinating was how when I hunted up in Arkansas in the mountains a couple years ago, I never found a scrape. Maybe we found a couple on top, some of the top of ridges. But he's talking about like finding some on the benches and finding stuff on the slopes and stuff like that. And I was told by some locals like they don't ever scrape down there because it's too rocky. And he mentioned the episode because I asked him that. He's like, sometimes it is, but also you'll be surprised in what they will scrape up even if there's rocks there. And like he was talking about, like if he goes in and finds a spot that like, man, there should be a scrape here, but it's not because it's too rocky, he'll rip some of those rocks out of the ground, like some of the smaller rocks, and like kick the ground up real good and almost make that scrape more readily available.
Yeah.
And then the bucks will start using it.
I've seen videos, hunting public videos of Ted Miller in Iowa, and he does the same thing where he'll go get some freaking dirt from somewhere, like the river or something like that, and carries it up in the woods and digs a hole and half fills it with that dirt that it's real loamy, like soft dirt, and mixes it with the dirt that's already there, and he like makes his own little dirt patch and swears by it. So that's interesting.
And now another thing we talked about on another scrape episode a long time ago, when we had Troy Pottinger on.
Okay, yeah.
I think we talked about with Michael Pike, after, I think it was in one of the outro episodes, one of the breakdown episodes, we had discussed.
Back then, we were doing the outro at the end of the episode.
Yeah, it was like a 5-hour long podcast.
Yeah, it was a long podcast.
But actually, real quick, look up Troy Pottinger's first, that Scrape Masterclass episode.
Pretty sure it's 175.
Okay.
Just off the top of my head, let's see if I'm right.
But I don't think Troy necessarily did this, but I think we talked about after the fact about, like, if you found a really hot scrape in an area that's maybe not huntable and something that you're not going to focus on, actually digging up some of that dirt with a shovel, like when it's actually being used pretty readily available, or when it's readily being used, and transferring that dirt over to
175.
Episode 175 is Scrape Hunting Masterclass with Troy Podger. It's a must-listen to episode, guys, if you really enjoyed this week's episode with Drew. But transferring some of that scrape dirt from a different scrape over into an area where you're making a mock scrape or trying to fresh up a different scrape, because you're bringing in all these different scents. And also same thing about transplanting licking branches.
Yeah.
Like say you see some licking branches from a scrape that's maybe it's on a logging road, it's getting hit pretty good, but it's not in a huntable spot. Take some clippers in there, cut off 24 inches that licking branch, and then transfer it, wear some gloves, transfer it over to
zip tie that sucker
up.
up.
Zip tie it, make a mock scrape with it, or put it in an additional scrape that you think's huntable, and then make it even more, make it smell like it's even other deer in that general area, especially if you transplanted that, not just a couple hundred yards, but a couple miles in a different direction, in a completely different deer group.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting point that Troy brought up about how, for years, that scrape has been worked, and that soil potentially, I don't know, maybe smells different than the surrounding soil. Not that there's still deer urine in the soil that they can smell, but chemically, I don't know if it might change the compounds in the soil or something like that, because they're freaking peeing on it all the time and messing with it. So that patch of dirt probably does smell different than the rest. And so bring that in. And actually, we found a good example of that on the club. We went out on the club again this past weekend. I took Tiffany and Piper out there. We had Piper in the little baby chest rig. Dude, Piper's a little woods baby, man. We're dragging her through the briar thickets and everything, dude. That baby is there for it. She loves it, man.
She doesn't have a say in it anyway. So
no, she doesn't have a say, but she's having a good time. She's grabbing the grass and everything, pine trees as we're going by. She's smiling the whole time. And we took Sam and Blakely out there too, and we were putting some of Sam's cameras out. And we went to a scrape that I'd found last year, just in passing. I had seen it, and I was like, "Hey, let's go put a camera on that scrape again, because it's in a great, excellent hub, probably the best hub on the property." And there's all kinds of habitat edges that run into it. And I was like, let's go back down to that scrape. So we get there, and it's on a beech tree, a young beech tree that's growing right up against another bigger tree. And it's just got that classic, just umbrella of perfect licking branches. And so the thing is I don't know. I mean, it almost goes around the whole tree. It's like a half moon. It just goes around the tree. And it is I was showing Sam and Blakely this because, they're pretty new, and I was showing them, what to look for with the scrape. And I was like, I mean, you can look at the dirt, and it's indented where they've dug it out from where they pawed it out over the years, and you can literally see this little trench that they've dug around the tree. And I was like, that's what you're looking for. But I was telling them that for it to be like that, they've been scraping on this thing for years now. There's no telling how long. And so that goes back into what Troy was saying, that dirt probably smells different. There's a different quality. So I mean, yeah, it would be potentially interesting, especially if you're creating a new mock scrape to go in there and get a couple shovelfuls of that dirt and just transfer it over. And if nothing else, it'll smell different. It'll smell like fresh earth, and it's not going to smell like the dirt of wherever you've transferred it to, because they can absolutely tell the difference, I think, between those two. And so it just might be a new thing. Like, we didn't put any scent in that scrape either. We just scraped it all out and got all that fresh earth, and you're standing there, you can smell that dirt, and, that'll get them scraping on it, get them using it. But if you transfer dirt from elsewhere, like, that's going to pique that curiosity factor hard, I think. So, interesting tactic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm curious doing the whole licking branch and, cutting off licking branches off one scrape, transferring it to a different scrape, just to add a realism of, another buck moved in or other deer moved in and kind of get that curiosity going. Also, another thing with Drew, and kind of like that Drew talked about, is, the position of these scrapes is still around different contour breaks where you have that really steep slope as it comes around the side of a ridge. It kind of starts to flatten out, and he likes to kind of key in setting his stand up because he's a big bow hunter on that contour break where that scrapes up above him. And one thing he talked about is how often you might get this buck on camera once every few days. And he mentioned this because I think you asked him or I asked him about, how often do you need this buck on camera in order you feel confident going in there and killing him, because he's not using cell cameras, so he has to physically hike out there and check these cameras. And he's like, if you catch him on camera, every couple of days, like every other day or something like that, that's really good, because the thing is, he might still be coming by the camera, but he's coming downwind of it below the camera, and you're just missing him.
Yep.
And he's like, it's happened so many times where he's shot deer that came in downwind, scent checking that scrape that never was on the camera, but he killed that buck because he was in there at the right time. And it kind of goes back to what, one of our past guests and one of our buddies, Shane Parker's talked about, when he's run, hundreds of trail cameras, and he'll find a really big scrape like this, like we're talking about, and he'll put one camera at the scrape, put another camera facing directly away from the scrape downwind, and have 2 or 3 cameras around a scrape, so if a deer comes within 40 yards of the scrape, he's going to catch it on camera. And how often he was seeing bucks coming in downwind scent checking, but never actually coming up to the scrape itself. And again, that's deer still killable if he's coming through during daylight. It's just you got to make sure you're far enough off that scrape. When he circles around downwind or down thermal of that scrape, you can get a shot opportunity at him.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's very interesting. And that's how I killed a mountain buck last year. He was swinging around a scrape. He wasn't going to it. And that camera on that scrape, I positioned it in a way where I caught some of those deer that were swinging around it, but not many, because they're so far back, past the scrape that you're just kind of getting lucky if they trigger it because they're so far back there. But that spot really opened my eyes to that, just from my own experience last year, where, it is like a ton of deer are just winding that scrape. Or sometimes I even think they're visually checking it too. Like they're just kind of taking a peek at it, looking down there, seeing if there's anything standing there, and then going on their merry way. So I don't know, interesting stuff, man. I love scrape talk.
By the way, another conversation, kind of about his first episode, talk about whip rubs. One of our buddies, Clay Harper, sent me a video of a guy in a Facebook group showing a buck, like a big mature buck in Georgia on public land, making a whip rub. And I'm talking about ripping the top. And it's exactly what we talked about, where you find these whip rubs, because we've had a lot of messages recently from a bunch of listeners asking, is this a whip rub? Is this a whip rub? All this kind of stuff. And we've talked about the damage on whip rubs, where if you have a sapling the size of whether it's your pinky all the way up to your thumb in diameter, and it's broke off, the top of it's broke off.
Yeah.
That's that buck's putting out a lot of testosterone. He's doing a lot of damage to it. And typically he's got a pretty decent rack if he can twist it up and rip it off. And this video showcased that. He comes up to this sapling, dude, walks up, and it's from over the shoulder shot with the trail camera, where he's walking just past the camera. He hooks this thing, and he goes to just shredding it, and he rips it up, and it is snapped off 4 inches off the ground.
That's it.
And I'm that's what you're looking for. That is, especially super early in the season, that's what you're looking for right now. Velvet's coming off. They're starting to, ramp up testosterone. They're not necessarily rubbing some bigger trees quite yet. So, if you find some of those smaller saplings that aren't just skin up, but are the tops are broken out, or a shrub where it's all broken up, that's probably a pretty decent buck that's going in there and actually doing a lot of damage to it. And that's something definitely key in on. But it was cool seeing that video. So we might share that video, post it, because it's
I want to see
example.
it. I want to see it. I haven't seen that yet. That looks really cool. Or that sounds really cool. I'd love.
He's a big buck too. He's a big old buck, big old Georgia public land deer.
So so kind of keeping it moving along here, you basically took what Drew talked about and went out and just immediately found it, right?
Okay, before we even talked about that, I was gonna say we haven't talked about doing the prescribed fire at the farm or anything like that either. We had that happen. Had that happen about a week or two ago. So before we went hunting, we decided to go burn our farm, family farm, my uncle's farm, who's been on the podcast, Anthony Troncalli. And earlier this summer, we did an episode with Kyle Leibarger and Alan Summerford at the farm. They came out and did a whole walk through the property, kind of did a little consultation. And they were both really impressed with the native habitat and like how this farm's kind of transforming it back into more of like a grassland property and not so much like heavily timbered property, but how much the deer are using this property right now. We, kind of devised a plan to burn some of it. We ran a fire out there, and dude, let me tell you, when you don't have rain for about 2 weeks, we had a day with a little bit higher humidity, but we ran that fire through there. That sucker was still burning as of 2 days ago, and it's been 7 days. There's like stumps still on fire, and just, Anthony's going back out there checking on it. He's like, man, that fire popped back up again. He's had to go around and chase it, which is good. He had a really good fire break, so it can't jump the fire break, but it's like it just keeps popping back up. But it looks completely different. And the crazy thing is, now it's like stuff starting to sprout up, and he's starting to show me photos. The deer were back in that burn the next day. There was droppings everywhere, fresh droppings all in that burn, because I went back out there like 2 days later, and the deer were already back in there using that stuff. And like, dude, all those acorns that fell on the ground, like, he's got some sawtooths on the property. They're all like kind of crispy, and you can see they're coming through and just picking all those up, just wearing them out, which is pretty cool. But yeah, we had that go on, and then decided to do go hunt Alabama. Alabama's a bow opener. Part of the bow opener opened this past weekend.
So there's like most of the state doesn't open until October 14th this year, but there are several different areas of the state. I think there's like 3 or 4 different areas that open earlier. So they broke it up into zones, which is way different than when we were growing up. It used to just be like it was Alabama. Here's the regulations, and now they're starting to break it up, and it seems like every year they kind of draw the lines a little bit finer, and they kind of change a little bit, which I like. It gives you new opportunity, and it's more area specific, which I think it should be.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting. It gives you some neat opportunities. But that was September 30th this year, right? So that's when you guys went up there.
First time ever hunting in Alabama in September.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. It's hot as crap though too. It was hot, freaking dry.
Wasn't as nice as Georgia, was it?
No, and it was crazy. It's like it felt like crazy, like just dry heat during the day, and then you start in the afternoon, and it was like this humidity, and you're like, oh my god, it's like both sides is terrible. But no, got some deer. First afternoon, slipped out there, and I was trying to do what Drew was talking about, like, of course, trying to find some feed trees in a little more kind of hilly area, and decided I dropped a pin in this spot. Actually, was sharing camp with our buddy Michael Pike, and also Shane Parker was there, and Olivia Glasgow was there, and I can't remember Alan's last name. Alan's listening to the podcast, but all shared camp. Is pretty fun hunting, but decided to drop a pin in this little thermal hub that I wanted to go check out, and hiked in there and found some feeds on the way in. But it's like all the white oaks, like this year is probably gonna be a really good year, at least in a decent part of the southeast for like mass crops, because it was kind of like it was in Georgia. Like every white oak is loaded, every red oak seemed to have acorns on it. The mountain oaks are dropping like absolute crazy. The deer aren't touching them, except I think it might have been Shane said he found some feeds on the mountain oaks. Or maybe it might have been someone else said that. But the interesting thing was I found white oaks that were dropping, and there's some deer sign. You find punch holes in the leaves and stuff like that. But there was like very light feed sign. Like it was nothing crazy. It was kind of like what we found in Georgia on a couple of white oaks. Where like they're hitting it, but they're not hitting it enough. I'd feel confident sitting there.
Yep.
And hiked into a spot where you had like a little drop kind of coming off this ditch going down to the bottom. The deer can't really go around. And when I got to that spot, I just started finding 2 real big rubs, super fresh rubs, and just tracks everywhere, man, crossing this ditch, going from one ridge to the other ridge, and sat up there. I was like, dude, this is too good to keep going. Like, I just need to check this out, because there's feed trees. There was a beech tree in there dropping beech nuts.
Oh.
Deer had it weared out underneath.
Really?
Like, it was tilled up. And you can tell the squirrels are in there, too, but, like, the deer had it tilled up droppings underneath it. It was right off this little ditch.
You ever chewed beech nut?
No, I have not. Oh, tobacco?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Nope.
Man, one time I was in a gas station up not far from where you were. I almost said the town, but I cannot say the town. But middle of nowhere, Alabama, and I was in this gas station, and they had the beech nut and the red man and some like little cannonball like tobacco plugs in the candy aisle, like out from the. I was like, hell yeah. Anyways, keep going.
Roll Tide.
Yeah. I was like, that's interesting.
That's Alabama.
It's not normally where you see the tobacco.
No. Or the candy aisle.
Yeah. Be like, get my Reese's and a big old plug of backer.
Yeah. But no, so anyways, I got set up, dude, and I climbed up the tree. It was like probably it's probably like 4:15, and I'm like, I pulled my backpack up with my bow, and I hang it, and I'm like about to take it off the boat, and I hear running towards me, and I'm like, is there deer like already up on their feet, like 2.5 hours before dark, 3 hours before dark, and I like look up to the hill, and I'm like, dude, that is 100% a deer coming right towards me. So like I unclip my bow, dude. I don't even have the camera set up. I unclip the bow, knock an arrow, get my release out, and I'm like looking, and then all of a sudden I see legs coming, deer, like the deer's coming right down to me, and I'm like, oh man, it's gonna drop off this point, come right this crossing, like 10 yards, perfect. So it comes down and gets to like, I don't know, maybe 40 yards. I could not tell. I could see the body, I could see head for a part of it, but I couldn't tell if it was a doe or a buck. And it's decided to keep going down the ridge point just past me, like just past like this drop, and never dropped down to me. But I was like, man, this is gonna be pretty good. If the deer kind of got up and came towards me, which I'm thinking probably another hunter parked somewhere up there and kind of walked in, probably bumped that deer because the wind was coming from that direction. And anyways, sat through the rest of the afternoon, and at like 5:30, I hear same thing, deer like kind of trotting off one of the ridge. Like there's two ridges right between me. I'm sitting in a ditch, a small little ditch in between them. So I got one ridge off to my left side, one ridge off to my right side, vice versa. And I hear one come off the left side, like 75 yards ahead of me, and drops down into the bottom and gets quiet. And I'm like, what the heck what is it doing? I couldn't see it. I could hear it. And then I could hear it kind of going up the other side of the ridge. And I'm like, I could never see it. I'm like, crap. That kind of sucks. Then I hear 30 minutes later, same thing now from the right-hand side of the ridge, drops down, lingers for a little bit, and kind of goes up the left side. I'm like, what is going on? And this place is really dry. Like Alabama's, we're not as severe of a drought as parts like Louisiana, Mississippi, and, parts of Arkansas and Texas right now. But it's been dry for probably,
probably almost a month.
Yeah,
right?
3, 4, almost 4 weeks now. And I think they said in September we only had like a total of like 2 inches of rain for the whole state of Alabama. So it's getting really dry. And I'm like, I was thinking like maybe, water, maybe there's a water source. Because I'm sitting on a ditch that you can tell when it rains there's water comes through, but like there's no water right there. Well, if it finally gets dark, nothing else shows, so I climb down. Instead of going back up the ridge to my truck where I came in from, I'm going to walk this ditch up and then hit the ridge and just see what's up there. I go up there 75 yards, and there's a watering hole there that is tracked up, dude.
Oh.
Like, I walked up to it, and, like, you start coming up to it, and I'm like, you start smelling like deer and everything, and I'm like, there's got to be water here. And I, like, peeked up with my headlamp, get up there, and there's a little like, rock outcropping kind of coming in that little ditch, that little, it's not a creek, just a little runoff. And there's a deep pool right there, and it's just tracks everywhere. And like the water, you can tell where the deer had come down, and there's tracks in it, and the water's kind of stirred up on one side of the watering hole.
Oh,
dude! And I'm like, son of a gun. I'm like, okay, but I'm like, cool. Like, dude, got a watering hole. They're hitting it, dude. I mean, in both sides there was like 5 trails, like total 5 trails, 3 on the left, 2 on the right. They were all dropping to this watering hole.
Oh, that's epic.
And the ground was all torn up around it and everything. I was like, man, I'm like, okay, this looks good, dude. This looks real good. I'm like, man, I'm probably gonna come back in here. Maybe in the morning, or if not tomorrow afternoon, the following afternoon, and sit this water hole and see if I can catch a deer coming through here. Because I'm hunting for a buck, hunting for a doe, whatever opportunity. I lost my freezer, so I'm trying to, stack up some deer meat. So it was a hike out. We go back to camp, talk, stay up crazy late to the point I'm like, okay, I'm not going to wake up. I'm not waking up in the morning to go hunt, but I'm going to wake up at daylight and slip through some of these areas and kind of continue scouting, because this is the only little spot I scouted, which is total, like, it's might be 20 acres I've walked through. So I'm going to keep going scouting. So I went to another spot, another ridge line, a little bit further up from where I was at. Started walking in there. I get off to this end of this ridge point, and I'm like, man, there's got to be some good cover off this end of this ridge point. I get up to this big oak flat, and I look over, and at 35, 40 yards, I can see this scrape. No question. I can see. I'm like, oh my god! And I walk up to it, and it's a sparkleberry bush growing up, big sparkleberry bush. It's got like 7 licking branches. And this scrape, I told you, it's the size of your kitchen table. It's 7 feet long, 4.5 feet wide, completely destroyed, tracks all in it, everything, droppings around it, deer droppings. And then there's another scrape adjacent to it. So there's another scrape, 5 yards away on another sparkleberry bush, not as big, but bigger than this table probably, but still a huge scrape.
Yeah.
And it's in wide open woods. I'm like, dude, this got to be nighttime. So I like dropped the pin on. I'm like, dude, might need to put a trail camera here. Walked out the ridge, and I was thinking the ridge point was gonna be real thick and they were gonna be bedded there, but they weren't. It was real open. So decided to hang a right and kind of work a topo line straight up the other side of this ridge, kind of farther up. And it starts getting a little bit thicker. I start getting in there. I'm like, man, there's deer trails, there's tracks. Like I see punch holes in the leaves. And I come up, I go a couple hundred yards, I find another 2 scrapes. Really good, not as big, probably about as big as this table, but still impressive. That were fresh, ground's all tore up, tracks all in it, droppings all around it. And I'm like, okay, this is looking better. Keep following the sign. And there's white oaks around me and some red oaks, but like they were dropping very sporadically. It wasn't like any of them were like raining per se.
Yeah.
Go a little bit further up, and I decided, I'm like, man, I'm going to cross this next little drainage, go up on this next ridge line, because there's like an old clear cut up there. And I'm like, I'm just going to go check out what this old clear cut looks like on the back side of it. And decided to drop down. As I'm dropping down, I'm like, man, there's tracks everywhere. Like you see punch holes, and every now and then you see like a clear track. And I get like halfway down that little drainage, and I hear a deer just get up and take off running on the next ridge line. And as it's running, it sounds like you're running through the woods with 2x4s on your hands, just slapping trees, just pop, 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 just like making all this racket. I'm like, holy crap, dude! Like, that might be a pretty good freaking buck, dude. And I'm like, I'm about to go check him out wherever he was at. So as I drop down, I get down to the bottom, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there, and this white oak in front of me, huge white oak, is just raining acorns, and I'm like, huh. And then I look down, and the ground is destroyed. The feed sign is incredible right there. Like this whole drainage is all like just tilled up, and there's tracks everywhere, there's droppings. And I look up a little bit higher, kind of start looking up that ridge, kind of right where, going towards where that buck was at, or where I assumed that, if it was a buck, it sounded like a buck, kind of running off, was bedded, and there's 3 big scrapes, like a little scrape line going up directly to where that deer had gotten up to go to bed.
Yep.
And I get up to the scrapes, and dude, they're destroyed, dug out. You can see that deer had come across that bob the same way I did, and was pulling all the leaves and everything down the hill towards the ditch.
Yeah.
And there was a print, there was a track sitting in that scrape, in one of those scrapes, dude, that was nearly as big as my hand. And I was like, okay, this is great. And it's going right up to where that deer had just got up and took off running. So I'm like, I see all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go up any further. I'm not going to get in his bedroom. Like, he was probably bedded 30, 40 yards from there. I'm like, I'm not going to go all the way up to it. I know he's bedded in this area. So I started side hilling around and decided to kind of slip around and just kind of keep seeing if I could find any other feed trees, because that little point right there that he was bedded off of had a ton of white oaks on it. And the only ones that were dropping were in that ditch.
Yep.
All the other ones I checked, nothing was dropping. Only the one in that ditch.
Did they have stuff in them?
Did they have... I did not look. Did not look up. Because my thing is, like, I'm not too worried about, like, if it has, I'm like, I'm hunting it now for the next few days, if not the next week or so. So, like, let's find the hot tree to focus on. So, anyways, keep slipping around, and I come around the edge of this ridge, kind of go up another 150 yards, and all of a sudden I hear, like, just kind of like trotting. It was like shuffling in the leaves real loud. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, that's not a deer. Because I was standing up against a big, I think it was a big poplar I was standing up against. And, like, huge. And I'm like, man, what is that? And it's like kind of coming through that clear cut towards me. And all of a sudden I hear a squeal. I'm like, dude, there's pigs up here.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, oh, crap. I'm like, well, dude, we're about to shish kebab a pig.
Yeah, come on.
We about to freaking shoot a pig. And then for the next 45 minutes, I was stalking pigs off the ground. Got them within the first group. Got within 20, 25 yards of them and could not get a shot. One big old black pig, he was out there, dude, just kind of going back and forth. I'm like, if I had a gun,
yeah, you'd be in trouble.
You'd get it. Like, dude, you see them like hitting trees or like shaking like saplings and stuff, kind of rooting around.
That's fun, isn't it? Like sneaking up on them like that.
Oh yeah,
because you can get close.
Well, as long as they're scared of you, which thankfully these were scared of me, because finally the wind swirled and it was blowing towards them for like a couple minutes. I'm like, why aren't they busting me? And finally, and I was like,
they're rooting their way towards you.
Well, maybe it's the thermals. It was really sunny, like on that little ridge line I was on. And finally, like they went squirk, and then they just tore off, dude. And they came closer to me. They ran right by me, and I'm like, dude, if I had a gun, dude, like I didn't even get drawn back. I was like, there's no way. But they came by like again 20 yards, took off running down the next little drainage, and I'm like, I just listened for them. I'm like, I guess we're pig hunting now. And I'm like, they can't run that far. And I listened, and all of a sudden they stopped, and I'm like, if they stop and go back to feeding, like I'm slipping back down, and they did. So like I turned, I'm like, all right, we're not deer hunting anymore. We're not deer scouting, we're pig hunting. So like started slipping down that little ridge point, going down towards them, and I start going down. I didn't go 50 yards, and I hear the same that shuffling noise. Like I've never been around a lot of pigs, but man, they got little shuffle little feet, dude. Like even like a big pig, like the biggest pig I saw was maybe
Did
like.
Did you ever hear them like popping their teeth?
Oh yeah, they did, and I thought they were doing that at me, and I got a little nervous because I was looking at like what tree can my fat butt climb around me, and there wasn't many options. Let's just say there were a lot of saplings, but yeah, they were popping their teeth and kind of like fighting and stuff. But anyways, I heard that shuffling. It was coming back towards me. I'm like, are they coming back up here, dude? So like I slipped down there, and I get set up, and I'm like, there's like a one of those like holly trees, holly bushes kind of growing, and I couldn't really see past it, but I could see stuff moving. It's like coming towards me. I'm like, oh crap. I'm like, so I dropped down to a knee. I'm like looking, and also I see legs. I'm like, dude, that's a pretty good sized pig. You know, probably 110, 125 pound pig, and it starts coming right towards me. I'm like, you were about to get shot, dude. Like we're about to do some broadhead testing right now, okay? And it turns, and it's like one of these like kind of brown black splotched pigs, like kind of like two-tone pigs, and it comes and starts like kind of milling around, just like sitting still. I'm like, oh dude, it's 20 yards from me at this point. It gets up to like 20 yards, gets almost all the way up to like 15 yards of me, and I'm like, oh, you are so dead. And I'm picking lanes and stuff, and there's some stuff in the way.
No shot yet?
I draw back. Oh, I get drawn back, and I'm like kind of sit there anchored, and I'm like, okay, like I just need you to like kind of ease around a little bit to the left because it's kind of walking to my left. Had a good lane there. I'm like just sitting there with my pen. I'm like kind of watching it coming. And right before he hits that lane, he turns and goes right down that point and just keeps feeding. And I'm like, well, I guess we're going to chase after a pig. So like, dude, I grab my stuff, and it's like by now it's like 10:30 in the morning. Second it turns away from me, it's been pretty calm all morning. Day winds start to pick up, and I can't hear it walking anymore. So I'm like, I kind of start easing down there. I'm like, maybe I can catch it in a little opening. It's kind of thick saplings and stuff. And long story short, lose the pig. And like, you get too loud. I couldn't hear him walking and rooting around and stuff. But I had seen a little bit of pig sign earlier in a couple spots, but not like a ton.
Yeah.
So they were probably just working their way through. But I was like, man, that was fun. But the cool thing was, I was telling Shane this, like when those pigs were in, there was like no nerve at all. Like if it was a doe, I would have been way more shook up. But like the pigs, I'm like, okay, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And Shane was like, dude, if you can be like that with a big buck, you'll kill almost every big buck you have an opportunity. If you can like, keep yourself that controlled. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But it was fun with the pigs. But anyway, decided to hike out and went back and kind of talked to the guys and everything kind of midday. And I decided, since I blew that buck out, because he probably saw me. I don't think he could smell me because I was kind of working into the wind. But when I was coming off that ridge line, dropping into that drainage, he definitely probably saw me. That's why he spooked so hard. I'm like, I'm not going to go in there this afternoon. I might come in here another day or two later, but like I'm going to go hunt that water hole. So I go to the water hole, got set up perfectly. It was money spot, 25 yards to the watering hole. Nothing showed. And I'm like, didn't even hear anything moving around because there's enough leaf litter in there. You could, if something was walking around within 100 yards of you, you would hear it more than likely. And I just never heard anything, never saw anything, and that was kind of a wrap. But the next day, we again just went back to camp. Me and Pike kind of got all set up, went over and hung out, and then we decided to next morning, like, hey, let's sleep in, because again, I didn't have anything I felt confident going into in the mornings, and it seemed like everybody that was hunting mornings, because there's a couple of people in camp hunting mornings, it seemed like the deer were already back in bed like early, just probably because of the temperature and everything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's go in the morning. Let's go like drive some spots and just like kind of like heat. Pike kind of showed me around, in this area, and I was kind of, just kind of get a better lay of the land, covered some ground, and dude, we saw a 2.5-year-old buck that was beyond impressive. He crossed the road right there in front of us. This is after us, a couple hours driving around. And he stopped on the side of the road. We pull up and park right next to it, 10 yards. And I'm like, dude, that is no older than a 2.5-year-old buck. Just scrawny legs, little tiny head. But his antlers did not match his body.
I mean, how big was he?
I mean, probably 115-inch 8-point. with like really good mass as a 2.5-year-old.
I'd kill that deer.
Yeah, I'm like
every day and twice on Sunday.
Yeah, and I'm like, holy crap, dude. And I'm like, that's unreal. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, just wait and see. So we covered some more ground, found some other really good spots as well for some other hunts in the future. But after that, just decided I couldn't hunt that afternoon. I had some other things I had to take care of, so I had to leave. But it was a fun opening weekend. Got to learn a lot. But dude, it was as hot as crap. Upper 80s the whole time, kind of dry, stagnant. A little bit of swirling winds and stuff like that, kind of like what you deal with early season.
Typical early season weather pattern.
But now we got a cold front coming through. So
got
me a little more excited about going in there where those 3 scrapes are at and that hot feed tree and trying to sit on that buck on a morning hunt.
Listen, dude, that spot, what you showed me on the map and everything, and just how it sets up, like, gosh, that is ideal from a couple different past guest standpoints. So, of course, Drew Atkinson with like the scrape line thing. You found exactly what he was talking about with the scrape lines, where he's working a transition. You're kind of in his core area, and that's probably like a scrape line that he's working during the daytime. But also, it relates to Scott Seals and his feed tree episode we did with him earlier this summer. I think it was episode 502, maybe. But it's like Feed Tree Masterclass with Scott Seals. You can go check it out. Actually, you can go to our website and our podcast page. There's a little at the top of like the podcast feed. There's a little search function, and it's actually really good for finding episodes like that. So you can go use that to find it. But it's early 500s. It was in May of this year, and it's with Scott Seals. And Scott specifically likes to target early season bucks midday on feed trees, and to do it successfully, you have to be like right there on top of them. Like you got to be in a place where they feel secure. And what was interesting about where that buck was bedded is he's kind of bedded maybe a little bit offset on a little drainage that goes up into some thick cover. And this little drainage goes down into, I mean, on the topo map, it looks like a little bitty baby hub, you know, like not really a big thermal hub or anything like that. But it seems like there's a couple little ditches that kind of come together. And he was basically up on one of those ditches. And per the GPS studies that we were able to take a look at, which are still live on our Patreon, we had GPS collar data for a bunch of different bucks in Alabama, both on 2 different WMAs and a couple different hunting clubs. And that deer, according to where you think he was bedded just like all those ones that we looked at. And they all bedded kind of the same way.
Which, by the way, those studies are on Patreon.
Yeah, so they're still live on our Patreon right now. You can go check them out and go look at the videos where we broke them down and put them on a map and everything.
Patreon.com/the Southern Outdoorsman.
Oh, yeah. So on those, the deer, that was a big thing for us a couple years ago when we first saw those, because to that point, you know, pretty much most of what we hear is like the deer bed on ridge points and they bed wind to back and they do this and they do that. Well, a lot of what we saw on those GPS studies was not that, like, ever. Like, they didn't ever do that. They were bedded mostly in draws. They bedded close to roads. They bedded close to forks and roads.
Saddles,
and like offset from a saddle.
And just off of a thermal hub up a ditch.
Yeah, just up a ditch, like just off a thermal hub, exactly like what you're saying. So they were bedded in these little kind of out-of-the-way spots, usually, I mean, pretty much always in thick cover and pretty much always inside of the thick cover a decent ways, not like smack in the middle of it, but 30, 40 yards into it at least. And he was set up just like that, which was really cool to see. And then also the thing with Scott Seals about getting in on his core area, the way that this sets up is that feed tree is dropping right on that transition. And to me, it's like the most textbook spot ever for that, dude. Like, it just looks so good. I mean, I wasn't in there, so I'm like detached from it, but just looking, like, from what you told me what it looks like on the map, I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, I would be in there ASAP. Okay. And a little thing we haven't mentioned yet is, you know, we had that SOA hunt last year. Well, Jacob drew it this year. So I drew it last year, Jacob drew it this year, so we're going 2 years in a row. So I'm pretty excited about that.
I'm pretty excited about that too.
But the scouting weekend just so happens to coincide with this big giant cold front that you probably shouldn't miss. So I don't know what you want to do. I don't know what you want to do. But my personal opinion, you should probably go hunting.
Do you want to go scout the SOA, or are you gonna go hunt?
I'm gonna go hunt, I think. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. We can go scout the SOA. But here's the thing about the SOA. Here's the thing. So we hunted it last year. It's a pretty diverse SOA. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different stuff. We hunted a more hilly part of it last season, and that's where that video on our YouTube channel now, you can go watch it. We ended up killing those deer basically in a drain and just below a cutover. So there's a big draw that came out of this cutover, and they were kind of funneling down out of that, and we shot them in that draw. The units that we got this year are very flat. No topography whatsoever. The guys that we stayed in camp with actually hunted these units, and they kind of gave us some information. One of them ended up killing a buck. Mm-hmm. But they were kind of talking about what they were seeing. The unit has like a clear cut on it. It's got one cut that's too old to hunt. It's definitely going to be too old to hunt. It's got another cut that's going to be kind of borderline. And then it's got select cut pines on it, along with your mature hardwoods around the creeks and stuff. Looking at it on the map, what I'm getting to is why I think you should just go hunt this weekend instead of worrying about that. Because looking at the map, I don't know if you have any other ideas, but I think I pretty much already know what I'm doing on the SOA hunt. My happy butt is sitting a road bed because there are some beautiful long straightaways that are huntable on these old road beds that go through this thing, going right through some select cut pines. They got some low spots kind of cutting through where, it's flat. It's very flat, but it's not like a tabletop. There's little rolls and stuff. And getting on one of those road straightaways where you can kind of look down like a straightaway that kind of dips and goes back up, kind of like you're hunting a saddle, but it's not really a saddle because it's flat land. I think that's going to be good. I think hunting that cut's going to be good. But when I'm looking at it on the map, and I'm kind of curious, I waited until this podcast to bring it up because I want to get your immediate reaction. But when I look at that, I'm like, I don't exactly know what I would go scout right now that would change what I think I'm going to do in January when we have this hunt, because it's going to be so different when we're there. Like, we're not even necessarily looking for deer sign per se right now, like when we go scout it. So I'm like, I think I'm just going to hunt a freaking road bed, What are your thoughts?
That's interesting. Yeah, because that place sets up for it. And again, this is a gun hunt, so that's why we're talking about sitting road beds, which you can on that place. Again, it's all closed access, so you can hunt those road beds completely safe. Plus, it's only us two that have the unit, so we get like a couple hundred acres just to ourselves on that place. That is interesting.
Because what would you scout out there besides maybe some habitat transitions?
That's it. I would just scout habitat transitions and look for any pre-existing scrapes specifically, and just seeing what areas, if you were to get more in the timber on some of that stuff, what areas potentially would set up better for travel corridors per se.
Yeah.
Especially off the creek or any of those little kind of hub areas, kind of by the water.
Yeah. Because my thing, though, is we could go look at that right now, but what's the first thing we're going to do when we get there in January?
Relook at it.
Go look at those exact same things to figure out where the fresh sign is.
That's very true. Okay.
I'm like, let's go kill a deer this weekend.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. I like it. I like that plan.
Okay. All right. I didn't know, because that kind of goes against everything I stand for.
I know.
From a scouting standpoint.
Yeah, you're like, we're going to scout it first before we go hunt it. Where you're like, well, we're going to scout it anyways when we get there.
Well, that's the other thing too. Is this place that you hunted this weekend is a place that we think we're going to put a little bit more time into this year and maybe over the next couple years. So I'm like, we need to start building a history with it. We could go out there and hopefully this year we end up killing something. Hopefully you kill something this weekend. But to have the consistent success, over the years, we need to start building a history with it. And this is kind of something we've started doing these last couple of seasons is kind of challenging ourselves and kind of going to new areas that we're not used to and stuff that is kind of out of our comfort zone. Because one, I think it makes the podcast better, because I think that we can ask people questions from a more genuine standpoint, where I'm really wondering about this because I'm in a similar situation now, and I'm not just hunting the same old place I've always hunted. Also, it's fun to go branch out and try to get good in different places. And one of the things that I think that I'm going to be trying to do is again, build that history and start figuring the place out long term.
Yeah.
Which is what I was telling Sam this past weekend. We were putting his cameras out because I almost joined a different hunting club this year, and I ended up staying in ours. But I was telling him I'm glad that I did, and really the main reason I stayed in ours is because I already got a year of history with it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, year one, I was just kind of looking around, trying to figure it out. Year two, year three, like that's when I usually end up killing something.
That's what Kevin Tullis talked about in his episode, which, by the way, you need to look that episode up.
Yeah, I know. But we reference that a lot.
But Kevin Tullis, he's a guy who's been on the podcast a whole bunch, probably been on maybe 3-4 times now. And he talks about that. He's had a lot of success in hunting clubs, lease properties with a lot of other members. And he always talks about, in that the first episode we did with him on this is...
I think it's episode 206.
Is that right?
206. Yes, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
We did go listen to 206 and 342. Both of those are with Kevin Tullis, and they're about hunting clubs specifically.
I think the first one... what was it, 302, 306? What was the first number?
206.
206. Talking about big buck sanctuaries. And what he says was the first year, you may luck into something, like you kind of learn some stuff that you might be able to capitalize on, but it's really what you take away from year one and learning the hunting pressure, where everybody else likes to hunt, and the patterns you see on trail camera, the patterns you see in the woods, the patterns you see if you kill a buck, to then apply for year two, and year two is really when you capitalize.
Yes.
And you go all in, and you have a really good understanding of how the property hunts. You have a good understanding of how everybody else hunts the property, how the deer use the property, and that's when you're able to really, go save up for some taxidermy bills.
Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of my view with this place, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are, because you were all hot and heavy about this place, which is Jacob's personality, man. Yeah, he has one good hunt where he gets to sneak around on some pigs, and he's like, dude, this is the best place we've ever hunted. We need to get up here. So with this place, my idea with it is like, hey, let's get up there. Let's hunt it as much as we can. Mm-hmm. Let's hammer it in the rut, get some good gun hunts in up there. But right now, especially right now, let's pepper some cameras through there. Let's find some scrapes, some good community scrapes to put some cameras on, whether we think we can kill deer on them or not. And go ahead and get those cameras out. Maybe some other terrain features, like some saddles or something, or maybe a bluff gap or something like that, and put cameras on those features and let them soak this year. And then next year we're gonna have a decent amount of hunting experience. We're gonna have local connections who we know up there, who we're gonna get to pick their brain and share deer camp with them this year. And then we're also gonna have trail camera data. Yep. So it's like this year, I do think we could kill something up there. But next year, I think we could go in with a purpose and really, because right now you're just kind of throwing the bucket of crap at the wall and seeing what sticks. You're just kind of going into this spot, you're going into that spot, and you're scouting around, and it's trial and error. Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully by next year you kind of got some areas narrowed down. You can go in there, and every hunt you're hunting with a purpose now. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So what are your thoughts?
That's what I said earlier. I mean, before we even did the podcast, I'm like, dude, I'm all in. I'm all in. So
yeah, no, but now you got to say it on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I'll tell you one other thing, just for listeners, is when you've hunted the same place your whole entire life, whether it's a family farm, hunting club you've been in for a long time, or whatever. It really does pay to go see some new ground, whether you change hunting clubs, change leases, you get access to a different farm, you hunt a different piece of public land, because it kind of, at least for me, it refires me back up about the scouting aspect. After you've hunted a place for 10 or 12 years, it's you kind of know where to hunt and everything, and it's more like a waiting game. Versus when you step foot on new property, you don't know what to expect, you don't know what the quality of the bucks could potentially be there or anything else like that. So there's a big excitement aspect, at least for me, about stepping foot on a new property that looks promising and spending a lot of time out there. So yeah, no, I'm definitely very, very excited about that, and kind of seeing how it all kind of plays out, and putting everything kind of together there. But also it's just a change of pace, which is kind of fun too. When you go to some place that you haven't previously hunted, to me, at least for myself, I look at through a different lens as compared to some of the properties that we've hunted for almost 10, 12 years now. Everything's, it's not even just being a little bit more optimistic about anything. It's more about you just truly don't know what's out there, and because of that, there's like an extra excitement level compared to areas that maybe you've hunted for just an absolute ton of time.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any specific goal as far as like building year over year out there? Just scout as much as you can. You're not really a trail camera guy, so like I doubt you're gonna put a trail camera out.
Yeah. Really just learning the land, learning the topography, learning the habitat, how deer use it at certain times of the year. I think is going to be really critical. To have more confidence, actually hunting a specific, area, general area on some of that public, and then also kind of buckling down. Don't look at everything through like the lens of like you got to cover the whole property, but like finding a couple areas, kind of doing the whole West Moe thing. Find 1,000 acres that you really like. It's got the diversity, it's got the habitat, everything you're looking for, and really kind of hone in on that versus jump around from one side of a piece of public to another side of a piece of public, or same thing in your hunting club. Like find 1,000, 2,000 acres you really like, learn it really well. And, while you're scouting it, if it doesn't look very promising, well, move on to a different piece. But kind of like focus through like the kind of a quadrant perspective. Find a quadrant you really like, look at it, learn it, understand how the deer are going to, access that place, how they're going to bed there, how they're going to travel there. If deer get pressure there, how they're going to escape from that area, and then learn all that aspects. And I think you'll be able to capitalize a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting, man. And I'm excited because of the friend group that we have up there right now, who we're all going to be kind of hunting together. We're already like sharing information back and forth and just putting minds together with some really good deer hunters. So I'm excited about that. Just to see who kills what. It doesn't even have to be me. I'm just excited to see I'm excited to see what Shane gets.
By the way, I think it'll probably maybe next Monday's episode. Y'all are going to see Michael Pike back on the podcast.
Yep.
He's finally back after like a year and a half of being gone. So
took a little hiatus.
And he is back and hot and heavy. So y'all aren't going to want to miss that episode. It's really good. But now we got some Q&As, guys. So
old Pike is back, man. I wasn't on that podcast y'all did, but I called him yesterday and we talked deer hunt for like 45 minutes, and the stuff we were talking about, I'm like, Pike is back, baby. Come on.
Fired up. But real quick, so on the Q&As, we're about to read some Q&As here. Appreciate everybody who's been submitting Q&As. Y'all have been awesome, all the listeners out there. You can actually go and actually submit a Q&A on our website. It's thesouthern.outdoorsman.com. There's a Q&A form there, or in the show notes on all the podcast episodes and on YouTube, you can actually click the Q&A link down below, and you'll fill these out. And this is something that me and Andrew will kind of answer on some of the podcasts. And specifically, if you want a question for, say, a past guest we've had on, you can submit it there, and we'll try to reach out to those guests and try to get them to give us an answer on it, and then we'll kind of recap their answer on these episodes. So appreciate all that. But we got our very first one. So who we have here?
All right, this one. So I'm actually skipping ahead for this one. So we got a little bit of a backlog of questions that we're working through every week. This one came in today, and we're going to go ahead and read it because it is extremely timely.
I saw this one, yeah.
So this is from Alf Rylander from North Carolina. He says, "Hey guys, big fan from North Carolina. Looks like a great weather front moving in this holiday weekend. We might see some rain, and with it, some dropping temps with lows in the high 40s. My question is, how would you adjust your game plan to account for this weather pattern? Would you stay focused on food? Maybe is it time to slip tighter to bedding? It seems like my area of North Carolina, central North Carolina, the deer are still on a fairly consistent bedding to food pattern. There are some oaks starting to drop, and if you can find them, the deer are already all over persimmon trees. That being said, scrapes are also starting to be made and freshened up. I'd say we have the ingredients for an exciting weekend in the deer woods. Would love to hear your take on it." I mean, he's basically in the same situation you're in, right?
Yeah. All right, so this is my take after what I found this weekend hunting up there, because this is why I kind of also decided not to go back and hunt it last minute, because we get this big cold front coming in. And one thing about these cold fronts, I think we saw some of this in the GPS data, that when you have only one of these cold fronts come through early season, it almost seems like the bucks don't go back to bed, or the deer in general don't go back to bed super early, like before daylight. Mm-hmm. They kind of linger and feed a lot longer. So if you're going to hunt mornings, I wouldn't go hunt a food source, but kind of like what you had mentioned, get tighter to that bedding, especially if you have an idea of where a buck's potentially bedding at, and or in a situation like where I found, where you have feed sign, scraping activity, and also bedding extremely close. That would be one of those fantastic spots. I think that would be worth going back in and actually setting up and even getting in there maybe just as daylight's happening, so you kind of not use a headlight. You can slip in and kind of get up your tree. And especially if it's going to be as cool over there in North Carolina as it's going to be here in Alabama. It's supposed to get down in the 40s at the lows. So, there's probably a very good chance you're going to find some really good movement throughout the whole morning all the way up to probably noon. So, like, my plan is kind of like what Alf's talking about is in his same situation is I'm planning on, hunting where I found these big scrapes underneath these feed trees right next to the bedding to slip in there and hunt all morning long. And then potentially even throw an afternoon sit there. But I think morning, the reason why I'm interested in going there in the morning with the cold front, there's other feed trees in the general area. I think this is the last feed tree they hit before going back to bed. Mm-hmm. And I would expect them to probably potentially come back around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning feeding there, because when we were driving around our last morning on this piece of public, me and Pike, we saw bucks moving, or saw a buck moving at like 9 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't even that cool. It's probably like in the upper 60s, low 70s at that time. With it being so much colder, I think they're going to range a little bit further. Also, I personally think, especially where we're going to be at, it's going to kind of spike that testosterone. They're probably going to be laying down a lot more sign, and they're probably going to be lingering outside the bedding area for a little bit longer, so you have a really good chance to capitalize in the morning. Then on the evening sits, I think it really kind of just dictates, not necessarily getting super tight to the bedding, but what is your best food sources or travel corridors closest to that bedding location where you're at. So if you're in central North Carolina, there's probably a lot of pine trees there, little mixed hardwoods too. If you have clear cuts in your area and you think the bucks are probably bedding or the deer are bedding in those clear cuts, kind of capitalizing on feed trees in and around that bedding location for an afternoon sit, you probably do pretty good.
Yeah.
That probably took everything you probably wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have much to add to that at all. Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Do what Jacob said.
Yep.
Maybe it makes them linger a little bit more. Although people argue about that nowadays. People definitely argue about that. Anyways, all right. Next up, Chase Pate is about one sticking. He says, "I enjoy the content. I have a question, and you are the only people I can think of to answer it. I hunt North Florida, and I'm thinking about one sticking. I do not know anyone that does it. I have several years of saddle hunting, and my concern is trying to climb a damp/wet pine tree. I feel like wet or dry pine tree would be both noisy and difficult to climb. Do you or anyone you know have experience/advice in one sticking in a pine tree?" And then he actually added to that, "I think the tether in my boots would be sliding around, and when it's dry, you'll be making lots of noise when you're reaching down to grab the stick." All right. So I've been one sticking a little bit this year.
Yeah.
Decided to take the plunge with it and just try it out. So when I've practiced one sticking a little bit, and I've actually hunted in the one stick like probably 3 times now, and I've gotten in a pine tree twice, and the pine tree is definitely more loud and more difficult than like a mountain oak or a poplar or something, I think I climbed a cherry tree even one time. Mm-hmm. Yes, so the pine tree, it's a lot more slick. I haven't climbed a wet one, but even the dry pine tree was very slick. Longleaf pine, like big scaly bark, and it was significantly more difficult and loud. I wouldn't say it was hard, but I mean it was different.
But I'll say this: it's loud if you climb in a climber. It's gonna make that crunching noise.
Yeah, I mean it's loud no matter what.
It's loud typically if you use some kind of sticks. When your stick's set, it's gonna be kind of loud. I mean, pine trees are just loud no matter what when it comes to climbing in.
Yeah, your tether. If you're worried about your tether sliding around, your tether's not gonna slide.
Well, let me tell you, if you want to fix that, this is something I started using last year. So I'm going to my second season using it. I feel terrible because I can't remember the company who makes this. They typically advertise on the Run and Gun Whitetail Hunters Facebook group on Facebook. It's a guy does 3D printing, and he has this little clip that snaps around your rope on your tether to keep it from sliding back down. So you can cinch it up, you clip it on, and it keeps it from sliding. And it works extremely, extremely well. So if you're worried that when you climb up on the stick and you have slack in your tether, it potentially sliding down, you can buy it, and it's like $6 or $7. It's pretty cheap.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's asking about sliding when he puts weight on it, if there's gonna be some give to it, or if he's talking about when he gets up. But But yeah, I would look into that thing if you're worried about.
No matter what, they'll keep it from happening for either way.
Yeah, I didn't really have problems with it sliding like when I put weight on it. Like it might settle just a little bit, but it's nothing serious.
And a wet pine tree is not overly slick anyways. To me, like a water oak, or any like really tight bark hardwood,
any really hard bark tree.
Those you're gonna have a lot more sliding on than a pine tree. Pine tree is typically anything if it's got teeth on a standoff or whatever, it's going to bite like crazy on a pine tree. So I wouldn't be worried about it being slick per se on a pine tree. Now, again, a water oak, live oak, I'll tell you what's terrible. It's soft, but it'll still slide is a sycamore. You climb a sycamore, dude, it's a little sketchy.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, you shouldn't have to worry about that.
I wouldn't be worried about climbing a pine tree. Like if that's what's keeping you from potentially one sticking, I wouldn't hold off because of the pine tree thing. I think you'll figure it out with a little bit of practice for sure. Now, if I'm hunting in a spot and I've got a pine tree and like a poplar right next to each other, I'm getting in the poplar every time because my stick bites so good in that tree. It's completely silent. But, if there's a pine tree there, I'll get up in a pine tree.
Also, another thing, which you can't do with that Catalyst Outdoors stick that you've got, that's mine, by the way. And, like, even Pike talked about in the episode, like, I let him borrow it for, like, almost 2 years, and then finally got a hold of it
again. Just donating it to the whole friend group, apparently.
So I haven't even used it yet. But you can't do it with that because the way they machined it, I don't think you can put the – Eastern Woods Outdoors came out with a single-sided cam cleat. So only one side of the cam cleat actually moves, so it doesn't make any noise. Because like that, you have the dual cam cleat on that one stick, and most other one sticks have had it. So when you unclip that rope, it snaps together and makes like a tinging sound.
Yeah, you have to like when you reach down there to get it, you have to like kind of stick your thumb in there to keep it from doing that. So I mean, you can keep it silent, but it's like an extra thing that you're having to like really pay attention to.
Yeah, think about. But again, you can get like some of these one sticks from like Eastern Wood Outdoors. You can get it with that new cam cleat, which is 100% silent. I got to see that at the Mobile Hunters Expo, which is pretty sweet. Or if you already have a one stick, you can, if it's just a bolt-on cam cleat on there, you can unbolt it and you can buy the other cam cleat. I think it's only like $45. And personally, if I get a one stick or get mine back from yours or from you,
all you got to do is go buy some rope and you're good to go. Well, and you got to get like a Mad Rock or something.
Yeah, definitely ain't gonna get a Mad Rock. But anyways, that would be the way to go to make it as quiet as possible. But anyway, So we got another one.
Yep, last one. This is from Jacob Parsley. He said, "I want to start by saying thank you so much for the useful information. I found the podcast this year and have been paying attention to every word. I've used the tips about finding terrain in the transition, finding the transition in the transition and trying to think different than other hunters, which has been huge. I found a great spot, set up a camera, and had deer on it within hours. My question is, what are your tips for scouting areas that have ample food, as in acorns, leafy browse, and greenbrier, and cover throughout? Literally, the deer can eat from their beds. How do you find patterns in woods that are so thick and rich with food and cover that the deer don't need to travel to find what they need? Thank you in advance." And he said, from Jacob Parsley, at Cottonmouth Outdoors.
I'll let you answer it first because I got my take on it. I'll let you go first.
Even when they have everything, like we've hunted places where they have everything like that. They got the bedding and the food. They still move. They're still going to get up and move in most cases. So I would start by looking at your edges in that situation, and look at your habitat edges, like where maybe you have that thicker cover, and then it butts up against maybe some less thick cover or some open woods or whatever. I'd start with that and scout that for deer sign, and just really let the sign kind of guide where you go. And where you end up hunting in that situation. But that can be tough. I was actually talking to Rocky about that yesterday because we were talking about a place we used to hunt, and there was like this 400-acre pine thicket that I had a couple different cameras in, and I had this big 10-point on camera in there, and he would be on one camera at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then he'd be on another camera at midnight that same day. And I'm like, this sucker is in that pine thicket. I mean, straight up in that pine thicket. And he's just living in it. I mean, because you're getting daylight pictures of him in there. You're getting midnight pictures of him, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock. Like, just all the time. He's just straight up living in that thing. And there's a lot of honeysuckle and greenbrier in there that he could eat on. And obviously I did not ever kill that deer. But I think if you were to try to kill a deer in a situation similar to that, it's going to be, you're going to have to hunt just the edges of it and try to find a feed tree on the edges of it. Or at least some kind of food, outside of it that they can come to. So I don't know. I guess that would be my take, is like, just start by hitting your habitat edges. If you've got terrain, I would start looking at terrain features that kind of correspond to those habitat edges, and I would look for feed sign or just general deer sign in and around those habitat and terrain edges.
Yep. So my take on is, if you're talking about like early bow season, if it sounds, the way you're describing it, sounds like kind of like a pine plantation. It's probably been like select cut and everything. If I had to guess, where like there's just a ton of ample cover underneath, tons of browse, everything. But the isolating feature there would be white oaks or red oaks. So if there's a way, whether it's like, this is like timber, highly managed timber properties where it's just like little streamside management zones, little SMZs, little ditches that have hardwood timber on it. If you can find isolated oaks in that stuff, that would be an awesome spot to really check on right now, especially early season. But as you kind of transition with the leaf off, all that stuff's going to look different when the leaves come off. It looks probably really thick now, and a lot of stuff will still stay very thick, but it's going to get slightly more open as the leaves come off, especially getting into like November, especially down here in the deep south, late October into November. And finding those little pockets of greenbrier, because a lot of times greenbrier doesn't just grow everywhere. You get pockets of it, and it's a really good browse source. And like, we've had guys, I've talked to guys in the past, not even on the podcast, that would find a really good greenbrier patch in and around thick pines, but like, those deer wanted to be in that 1 acre greenbrier patch and feed in, and them actually going in there and having success sitting on the ground because there's not trees to get in, and actually shooting deer on the ground in those greenbrier patches. So, that's something that, to me plays more of a factor, especially as you start getting into kind of, November, December time period. He didn't say what state he's in, did he?
Mm-mm.
So, I mean, that would be something I'd be paying attention to, is trying to find isolated white oaks or isolated oaks, because if you don't have white oaks, you have red oaks there, that's fine as well. And then also really trying to focus on, early season bow hunting, and like, especially like pine thickets like that, sucks. It's super hard. Again, props to guys who can be successful during that time of year, especially killing mature bucks then, because again, like you said, they don't have to move very far to feed. But as some of that cover dies back and some of that browse dies back, it makes it more and more isolated, where there's still food in those thickets, but it's also, they're starting to cruise, they're starting to cover a little bit more ground, especially start getting into the pre-rut. And really, if you have that abundant thick cover, I would highly recommend putting out some mock scrapes in and around where you are finding sign, and seeing how are bucks using those mock scrapes, or trying to find just a really good community scrape or a primary scrape, and how they're going about using it at different times of the day, and then using that information on how to access and hunt these spots. Because if you're getting a ton of activity, in the morning before daylight, and then it kind of dies off, well, you need to start backtracking those deer. Episode 122, I think, with
Jeff Homan.
Jeff Homan. Go back to listen to that episode and start using those cameras to backtrack, especially if you're trying to kill a buck, or if you're just trying to kill a doe, and figure out where those deer are spending more of their time in that kind of cover during daylight hours. And then the thing is, when you find that, you also have to figure out, how can I get in here and hunt it? Because a lot of times, if it's really thick, it's loud walking through that stuff. You make a lot of noise. You're touching a lot of stuff while you're going there, so you're leaving a pretty good ground disturbance. So you really have to hunt very smart, or in a very smart way, to be successful in that area. And then also, if you have opportunities to hunt with a muzzleloader or with a gun, you're really trying to fine-tune where those deer are using those areas now, so that when gun season comes around or muzzleloader season comes around, you have an idea of how to be able to access and be able to hunt in that kind of cover. But a lot of that you'll kind of learn during bow season, of where the deer are at, and then how they transition when the leaf cover really dies back.
Yeah, to add to that, 122 with Jeff Homan is an excellent episode for him to listen to, because Jeff, that's what Jeff hunts, man. He hunts thick, just lots of cover, lots of food all over the place, lots of pressure as well, and he had success in a setting pretty much exactly like that. And also, to clarify a little bit on what I was saying earlier, is if everything is thick, there's probably going to be, I doubt you're hunting like a 10,000 acre like shelter wood cut or something like that. So there's going to be some kind of edge in there, whether it's pines versus hardwoods, or pines versus different pines, or whatever. Like, there's going to be some kind of edge, and no matter how thick the entire place is, deer are still creatures of edge. so they're going to be attracted to those edges. So that's going to be something that you can key in on, even if it's like, let's say you have a block of pines over here and a block of pines over there, and they're equally thick, but they're two different kinds of cover. Like one of them's hardwood saplings and one of them is like briars. Deer are still going to be attracted to that edge, even if they're just as thick as one another. Just the fact that they're different habitats, deer are still going to be congregated around that edge.
Yep.
So that's why I say that's a good spot to hit, because you're kind of playing off of that. So I'd be curious of how that goes. I'd love for him to write back in and see how it goes. But all right, review time. We got the legend. Oh my gosh, you locked the dang phone. All right, here we go. All right.
Okay. Oh man, our boy Big Butt Nuts is back. He's a legendary reviewer. Title for his review is "I'm Back." 5 stars. Well, boys. This old buck has come back to check out what's going on in y'all's thicket. Just seen old Michael Pike the other day when he was driving through the Badlands. He about clipped me as I was crossing the road, looking like Mr. Fancy Pants with his Lexus. Take care, boys.
Awesome. Yeah, you see Mike, old Pike? He saw a big old muley out there out west. All right, this is from Bama Boy 67. Best in the game, 5 stars. I listen to this podcast going to work and coming home. Widest variety of speakers out of any other podcast. Thanks for what y'all do. All right, here you go.
All right.
We'll do this one and we'll end it on this one.
All right, so this is from Woodland Whitetails. 5-star review titled Southern Gentleman. My go-to podcast for hunting. These fellas got what you need if you enjoy hunting and enjoy good conversations with fellow hunters. The guys are respectful Southerners that share the same passion for hunting as the listeners. Highly recommended.
All right, man. Appreciate it, everybody. Appreciate those reviews. Those are always nice to see them rolling in. So, yeah, I guess to recap, y'all go check out the hats, man.
Yeah.
We're really excited about the hats, for real.
Yeah, go pick up some hats. We'll ship those out as soon as we get some orders coming through.
Yeah. Got the Blaze Orange hats on the way. Get you ready for gun season.
Also, to mention this, if you made it this far to the podcast, of course, you're a diehard listener. If you go out and implement things that you've learned from the podcast, whether it's something that me and Andrew's talked about, something that the guests has talked about, and you have success doing so, I don't care if you kill a doe, a spike, or the biggest buck of your entire life, write into us on our down in the show notes on the podcast and the show notes on the YouTube channel, and then also on our website there is a listener success form. Go fill that out. We're going to start giveaways starting in October. So any new reviews that come in the month of October, we're going to do some giveaways, give away some Onyx memberships and some other companies that we've partnered with to do some awesome giveaway packages each individual month going from October into January. So go out, kill you a deer, man. If you got a good story, write it in, and we'll vote on our favorite stories that come in, listener success-wise, and get some of those care packages sent out. So we appreciate y'all listening, appreciate y'all watching, and we'll catch y'all back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Y'all stay Southern.